Have you ever been turned upside down or close enough to it that you lost your own sense of perspective? I have, and it was not amusing in the least. Not as glamorous and breathtaking as the performance that we see in the Cirque du Soleil. Those are beyond fantastic. People with physical ability, intense training, and imaginative performance designers to support them create astounding visions on the ground, in the air, right side up and upside down, and all of them voluntary. The kind of upside down that is disorienting and unnerving is like one that I had in a vehicle accident when the small transport van I was driving picked up an unexpected wind gust. A little correcting would have served the need, except that I didn't realize the van had been loaded improperly. Weight was not distributed evenly enough to maintain balance, and the vehicle turned itself into a merry-go-round. It was more than a year before I could drive without the shadow sensation that I was about to turn somersaults in my car. I relived the accident over and over again. Today, COVID-19 and the resulting social requirements have made the routine of living an upside-down experience. They regulate every gathering of people, every trip to a place where you might encounter people, every action you make by its potential to cause contagion. Methodical is a word I heard recently when someone described her new mode of operation on a daily basis. Surfaces must be monitored and sanitized. All purchases must be wiped down before use or storage. At home, visitors are prohibited, and if they must enter, as in the case of repair technicians, they must also be masked and monitored so that proper sanitizing must follow their exit. Masks must be worn outside of the home, and a distance of 6 feet is assumed to be minimal protection against the transfer of the microscopic aggressor. We have become slaves to an imposed routine of self-protection and hyper-cautious social distancing that has made us almost robotic in our attention to a pattern of living that is unnatural and demanding. We share a rising anxiety that the independence we have traded on as a privilege of humanity now belongs to an uninvited invader who, for the moment, is claiming the attention of the entire world. The virus, not the victim, is in charge of our storylines for the foreseeable future. To minimize that in any way is to spiral away from reality, even though what we previously assumed as reality seems upside down. Losing a sense of control when it is not your choice can call up extreme responses that under scrutiny most of us would call irrational. In our Acts reading today, irrational action based on a perceived loss of control drove the religious leaders in Thessalonica to create a riot in the city. They dragged an innocent man from his home and turned him in to the city authorities as an offender of public statutes. These leaders felt themselves losing to a new teaching that had not been evaluated by them. They did not appreciate the influence the Apostle Paul and his companions had on those who heard and followed them. The time Paul spent proposing and explaining the message of this Messiah, Jesus, showing his credentials from their own scriptures and evidence from Jesus' ministry, was of no value to these teachers. They worried more about the effect of the change in allegiance by so many to a new way of thinking. It was easier for them to try to smother the threat in a dust storm of antagonism than it was to give the new way a place to nest itself within the tradition it proclaimed as its foundation. Their charge was, these people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has entertained them as guests. A triple whammy. Accusation. The missionaries of the new way were turning the world upside down elsewhere. Accusation. They were bringing this trouble along to Thessalonica like a determined virus into new places. Accusation. They had infected members of Thessalonica who were entertaining them as guests. The leaders were calling for a sanitizing edict against this new trend of understanding God and God's way in the world. The spreading of God's message was denounced as a hazard. In the same way, we are currently categorizing, and rightly so, COVID-19. But wait, the very idea of the gospel message as an infection has a kind of appeal that can only be properly appreciated from the standpoint of Christian history. Reality. We are heirs of a spiritual virus that turned the first century religious world upside down. Reality. Christ has given us the mandate to spread the infectious grace and love of God to all the world. Reality. From the prophetic in the book of Hebrews, we have this reminder. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Wherever we turn in our sacred texts, we expose the reverberations of a world being turned by design, by the will of the Creator. The resurrection at Easter is the apex of a world turned upside down by the power of vulnerability, divine vulnerability. First, God as a helpless baby incarnate and living among the poor, then suffering the ultimate weakness of crucifixion. Finally, Easter arrived with its earthquake and rumbling. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. The protagonists of Thessalonica were more accurate than they knew. In the last verse of our sending blessing today, we have a challenge from poet Linda Winchell that speaks directly to our task as Easter people. Isn't that what we're already doing? Turning things of this world around. Taking what God has made for us and turning it all upside down. This is the message of Easter. Amen.